Today we're taking a closer look at the Honor 500 Pro. I've been testing it for a while, and in this video we'll see how this new entry in Honor's number series holds up. I'll also be putting it side by side with its bigger sibling, the Honor Magic 8 Pro, to compare how a near flagship stacks up against a true flagship, especially in terms of camera performance. Let's jump right in. A quick shout out to my tech partner from China for sharing this video. A big thank you for making this possible. Hey everyone, it's Maiky from techmaiky. If you love staying updated with the latest gadgets, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our exciting tech content. The Honor 500 Pro comes with a completely revamped design this year. The rear cameras now sit in a horizontal row, giving off a vibe similar to the iPhone Air and Google Pixel. The main camera keeps last year's setup with a 200 megapixel sensor, while the telephoto lens is 50 megapixels with 3x optical zoom. Since this phone is heavily marketed toward portrait lovers, it carries over almost all the strengths of the Magic series, including the 3 custom Yago portrait styles, textured and black and white. In vivid mode, when you compare specific details at the default 2x zoom, the Honor 500 Pro comes incredibly close to the Magic 8 Pro. Aside from minor differences in skin tone caused by white balance, the overall results are nearly identical. Vivid mode delivers bright, lively colors and smooth, refined skin tones. Switching to texture mode, the colors deepen and become more expressive. This mode keeps facial details intact instead of smoothing them out like vivid mode tends to do, resulting in richer skin texture and a more realistic feel. Move to black and white mode, and the emphasis shifts to light, shadow, and mood. One of the highlights here is the catchlight in the eyes. Whether the subject's eyes are wide open or half closed, the catchlight adjusts naturally, making the portraits look alive. While both phones perform similarly with the 2x main camera portrait shots, bigger differences start appearing once we switch to the telephoto lens. For example, in this comparison, even though both phones were set to the vivid portrait style, their facial rendering strategies are totally different. The Honor 500 Pro opts for smoother, plied, more polished skin, while the Magic 8 Pro leans into detailed texture. This contrast shows that even within the same brand, the handling of light and shadow isn't simply copied across devices. It's tuned based on each model's hardware. Since the Honor 500 Pro's telephoto lens isn't extremely strong in resolution, it focuses more on blending and optimizing facial features. Its multi-frame processing smooths out details to create a clean, even look. The Magic 8 Pro's 3.7x telephoto lens, on the other hand, delivers noticeably sharper details, so its algorithm highlights its resolution advantage. Each phone leans into its strengths, so it's not really a matter of which is better, just different approaches to portrait style. Along with the 3 main portrait styles, the Honor 500 Pro also includes several film-inspired filters in the camera app. Another standout feature is that it supports dynamic portraits. Taking moving photos isn't new, but doing it in portrait mode is far more challenging because it requires its own dedicated algorithm. I was genuinely surprised to see Honor be the first to pull this off. It shows that the fierce competition in the smartphone market is actually pushing brands to innovate, which ultimately benefits users. On the front camera side, the 2 phones produce very similar image quality in daytime lighting. The main differences show up in highlight control and skin tone processing. At night, though, the Honor 500 Pro pulls ahead with its bright white screen edge illumination, which lights up the face almost like a small soft lamp. The Magic 8 Pro currently doesn't offer this. When it comes to depth of field effects, the Honor 500 Pro goes all in. It not only includes the same background blur effect as the Magic 8 Pro, but also adds a simulated focus shift blur. In this example, the focus shifting blur creates a swirling, stretched look in the out-of-focus areas, giving the photo a dynamic feel. There's also a bubble blur effect which produces hollow circular highlights, almost like floating bubbles in the background. Offering 3 different blur styles definitely adds more fun and variety to portrait shots. Of course, keep in mind that all these blur styles are algorithmic simulations, not real optical bokeh. Just something to remember. Now let's dive into the camera's basic performance. The Honor 500 Pro uses a main lens with a 24mm equivalent focal length, which is very close to the Magic 8 Pro's 23mm. However, its aperture is slightly smaller, so when you shoot close-up subjects, the background blur isn't as shallow or dramatic as what you get from the Magic 8 Pro. Image style is another area where the 2 devices part ways. While the Magic 8 Pro goes for a more natural, true-to-life look, the Honor 500 Pro leans toward a more more stylized approach. A big part of this comes down to sensor size. The Magic 8 Pro, as a top flagship, has a larger sensor that naturally captures more light. The Honor 500 Pro needs to raise the ISO to maintain proper exposure, and to make up for the drawbacks of high exposure levels, the phone increases contrast in post-processing. You can clearly see this difference in the photo comparison. When the 500 Pro boosts contrast, it doesn't just deepen the blacks, it also darkens midtones and highlights. This means things like bright yellow tones lose their punch and appear a bit muted. On the plus side, darker blacks help hide small dust marks on surfaces. Both phones also take very different approaches when shooting in high-resolution mode. The Honor 500 Pro supports 200 megapixel photos, but because of its smaller sensor, it needs to use longer exposure times to get a bright enough shot. To avoid issues caused by these long exposures, the software switches to a manual exposure solution, locking in a set of parameters that it considers the safest. The Magic 8 Pro, equipped with much stronger hardware, doesn't need to rely on these types of compromises. In true image quality, the 500 Pro still falls short of the Magic 8 Pro, but it does have one advantage. Its 200 megapixel resolution gives you tons of room for cropping and recomposing while still keeping plenty of detail. As for telephoto shots, both phones perform similarly at their native focal lengths. But in certain scenes, the Honor 500 Pro's tendency to push saturation and contrast can interfere with fine detail. For example, the white flowers on the bear look overly bright because the contrast pushes them too far, causing detail to get washed out. The biggest distinction is in the overall telephoto experience. The 500 Pro's telephoto lens is clearly tuned for portraits more than general use, which makes sense given its positioning. In low-light scenes, especially ones with complex textures, the difference between the Honor 500 Pro and a true flagship becomes obvious. In more challenging lighting environments, the 500 Pro can still deliver solid results, but higher ISO levels do affect color richness and highlight handling. At 3x zoom in dim conditions, the gap between the Honor 500 Pro and the Magic 8 Pro is visible at a glance. Now let's move on to the display. The Honor 500 Pro comes with a 1.5K screen that supports 120Hz dynamic refresh rate. However, it's not a full adaptive 120Hz system. Instead, it switches between 60Hz and 120Hz. For example, when you're reading, the phone drops to 60Hz. Watching short videos, still 60Hz. When browsing apps like Weibo, Xiaohongshu, or your web browser, the refresh rate tends to hover around 90Hz instead of jumping straight to 120Hz. You only get the full 120 Hz in system menus or while gaming. The upside is improved battery life because the phone conserves power. The downside is that when switching from the home screen to third-party apps, the motion might not feel quite as fluid. You can manually force high refresh rate mode, but you'll definitely burn through more battery. Speaking of battery, this is one of the Honor 500 Pro's strongest selling points. It packs a massive 8,000 milliamp hour cell and includes an 80-watt charger. You might have noticed a recent trend. Phones with big batteries usually come with chargers that top out around 100 watts, not the ultra-high wattages we saw a couple of years ago. This reflects the reality of charging efficiency. Pushing a huge battery and fast charging at the same time would require extremely high wattage, which leads to a whole chain of issues: heat buildup, higher energy density, and safety risks. So manufacturers have to strike a balance between charging speed, battery capacity, and long-term safety. All in all, the Honor 500 Pro isn't meant to be an all-purpose flagship like the Magic 8 Pro. Instead, it focuses on two specific strengths: portrait photography and battery endurance. And in those areas, it can even compete with top-tier flagships. For a mid-range flagship, its overall performance is well above average. That wraps up this review. If you think the analysis was fair, make sure to like the video and hit follow to support the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.